What does it mean to live free, truly free beyond the shadows of dogma and the chains of imposed morality? On the True Freedom channel, we dive into the depths of human existence, seeking the raw, unfiltered essence of life itself. Today, we unravel Friedrich Nietzsche's The Antichrist, a work penned in 1888, just before the philosopher's descent into madness. This book is no mere critique. It is a clarion call to break free from the oppressive yoke of Christianity's institutional morality and embrace a vitality that pulses through our instincts. Here, Nietzsche pits Dionysus, the god of revelry, instinct, and life against the crucified, symbolizing a religion he deems antithetical to human flourishing. In this exploration, we'll journey through Nietzsche's fierce rejection of pity as a virtue, his disdain for equality that breeds mediocrity, and his vision of the Mensch being who rises above the ordinary to embody noble values. We'll contrast Christianity with Buddhism, probe the psychological depths of Jesus as a redeemer, and reflect on how these ideas resonate with our modern quest for freedom. This is not just a video, it's an invitation to question, to feel, and to awaken. We urge you to join us. Leave your thoughts in the comments, suggest topics that stir your soul, and let's co-create a space where true freedom thrives. Our team is committed to crafting content that serves your curiosity and sparks your inner philosopher. So, subscribe, engage, and let's ascend the mountain together where the air is clear and the chatter of the mundane fades below. The Eternal Dance of Dionysus, Nietzsche's Antichrist Unveiled. Friedrich Nietzsche's The Antichrist, composed in 1888, stands as a towering testament to his intellectual ferocity, written 1 year before his mind slipped into silence and shortly after Twilight of the Idols. To grasp its essence, one must heed the final words of his autobiography, Ex Homo, Dionysus against the crucified. This phrase is not a mere flourish. It is the heartbeat of the text, a declaration of war against a worldview Nietzsche saw as life-denying. The German title, Der Antichrist, dances between two meanings, the Antichrist and the anti-Christian, and Nietzsche likely intended both. Dionysus, the Greek deity of wine, ecstasy, and instinct, finds to foes Christ, a worthy adversary, and the Christian, an unworthy shadow dignified only by Nietzsche's scathing prose. In the foreword, Nietzsche sets the stage with a voice that cuts like a blade. This book belongs to the very few. Perhaps none of them is even living yet. Possibly they are the readers who understand my Zaroff test, or one must be honest in intellectual matters to the point of harshness to so much as endure my seriousness, my passion. One must be accustomed to living on mountains to seeing the wretched ephemeral chatter of politics and national egoism beneath one strength which prefers questions for which for the forbidden. Very well. These alone are my readers, my rightful readers, my predestined readers. Why do the rest matter? The rest are merely matter. One must be superior to mankind in force, in lines of soul and contempt. This is no book for the masses. Spanning 60 to concise sections, it is a surgical strike against Christianity and its institutional form, a form Nietzsche saw as a betrayal of life itself. At its core, The Antichrist is a rebellion against Christianity's morality of compassion. Nietzsche extols a virtue free of moralic acid, a purity unshackled from the oppressive doctrines that herd the masses into submission. For him, Christianity's obsession with equality is a war against the higher man, a leveling force that erases noble values and drags all into mediocrity. He envisions a pathos of distance, a vast chasm between the ordinary and the extraordinary, a space where the Mensch emerges, unbowed by the petty resentments of the weak. Christianity, he argues, springs from illness, weakness, and spite, stifling our natural instincts and sapping the vitality of the human spirit. It crafts a sick, frail type of being, born ill yet commanded to be well, standing in stark opposition to Nietzsche's will to power, where instincts reign as the primal force of identity and growth. This critique deepens as Nietzsche labels Christianity a religion of pity, a trait he deems a weakness in a noble morality. For Christians, pity is a virtue, but Nietzsche sees it as a fiction rooted in hatred of the natural world. He writes, "This entire fictional world has its roots in hatred of the natural actuality. The Christian God, he contends, is no longer life's transfiguration, but its contradiction, a declaration of hostility towards life, nature, the will to life. God becomes a slander against this world, a lie about the next, a deification of nothingness. In this light, Christianity emerges as the antithesis of existence, a creed that sanctifies decline under the guise of holiness. Yet Nietzsche does not stop at Christianity alone. He draws a comparison with Buddhism, acknowledging both as nihilistic and decadent, yet praising Buddhism's realism. The critic of Christianity is profoundly grateful to Indian scholars that one is now able to compare these two religions. Buddhism is 100 times more realistic than Christianity. Buddhism, he argues, eschews a deity and the struggle against sin, focusing instead on suffering as an objective reality. I suffer rather than a moral failing tied to guilt. It transcends the self-deception of good and evil, offering a clarity Christianity lacks. This distinction reveals Nietzsche's admiration for a philosophy that aligns more closely with life's raw truths, unburdened by fabricated moral constructs. The origins of Christianity, Nietzsche traces to the Jewish instinct, a raised sentiment against the higher men, wielded by priests who were not decadents themselves but masters of a decadent populace. He praises their audacity in crafting a revaluation of all values, though he laments its direction toward decay rather than nobility. He outlines 5 stages of this denaturalization. Initially, Yahweh embodied justice, a reflection of Jewish power and self-affirmation. Then, God morphed into a demanding tyrant, morality lost its vitality, and Israel's history was rewritten as decay. A moral world order emerged. Obedience became the measure of worth, and Holy Scripture enshrined God's will, making priests indispensable. Disobedience became sin, a to love control that infiltrated every facet of life: birth, marriage, death, ensuring the priest's omnipresence among the holy people. From this soil sprouted Christianity, a revolt against the Jewish priesthood, yet an extension of its instinct. Nietzsche writes, "The little rebellious movement which is baptized with the name of Jesus of Nazareth is the Jewish instinct, once more the invention of an even more abstract form of existence. Jesus, crucified for his defiance, died not for others' sins, but for his own truth, a truth misunderstood by those who followed." Here, Nietzsche's tone shifts, growing warm, almost reverent, as he probes the psychology of the redeemed. Christ, he argues, was no priestly villain but a figure of profound inwardness. He knows that it is through the practice of one's life that one feels divine. Blessed, evangelic, at all times a child of God. It is not penance, not prayer for forgiveness, which leads to God. Evangelic practice alone leads to God. It is God. This alone is the psychological reality of redemption. A new way of living, not a new belief. This vision of Christ captivates Nietzsche. He calls Jesus an idiot, a term likely borrowed from Dostoevsky's The Idiot, not as an insult, but as a nod to his pure, uncalculating inwardness. If I understand anything of this great symbolist, Nietzsche writes, it is that he took for realities, for truths, only inner realities. Christ cultivated a freedom unbound by external demands, even the body's primacy, a feat no one else achieved. Yet this purity was doomed to misinterpretation. This bringer of glad tidings died as he lived, as he taught not to redeem mankind, but to demonstrate how one ought to live. What he bequeathed to mankind is his practice. His disciples, however, twisted this into doctrine, mistaking symbols for facts, birthing a creed of resentment. Nietzsche declares, in reality there has been only one Christian, and he died on the cross. Paul the Apostle emerges as the true villain, claiming Jesus' death atoned for humanity's guilt, a concept Christ himself had abolished. Jesus had done away with the concept guilt. Itself he had denied any chasm between God and man. He lived this unity of God and man as his glad tidings. Christianity, Nietzsche laments, squandered the Renaissance's promise, a revaluation toward noble values embodied by figures like Cesare Borgia, whom he admired deeply. Cesare Borgia's Popemai understood. That would have been a victory of the sort I desire today. Christianity would thereby have been abolished. The book closes with a call to recalibrate time, not from Christianity's birth but from its end. revaluation of all values. This is Nietzsche's and the mayhem to life, instinct, and the Mensch, a rejection of pity, equality, and the priestly lies that bind us. It is a mirror held to our souls, asking, are we brave enough to dance with Dionysus, to embrace the forbidden, to live as the mountain dwellers Nietzsche sought? In the Enchantress, Nietzsche offers not just a critique but a vision, a clarion call to reclaim the vitality Christianity has drained from us. Through true freedom, we've explored his disdain for a morality that weakens, his reverence for Christ's inward practice, and his dream of a world where noble values reign. This is the essence of true freedom: to live boldly, to question fiercely, to rise above the mediocre. We invite you to reflect what stirs in you after this journey. Share your thoughts below. Spread this video to those who crave depth and subscribe for more explorations into the human spirit. Next, join us as Alexander and Sophia unpack these ideas in a discussion brimming with insight. Stay tuned right after this. Together, let's build a community unafraid to seek the forbidden and embrace the eternal dance of life.
All right, are you ready for this? Today, we are diving deep into one of the most provocative works in philosophy, Nietzsche's The Antichrist. You know, I was checking out the excerpt that you sent over from that YouTube analysis. It's called Nietzsche's The Antichrist: Freedom, Dionysus, and the Übermensch. And yeah, this is going to be interesting. This is not your typical philosophy lecture, is it?
No, it's not. It's true. You're right. Nietzsche throws down a gauntlet right from the title.
Yeah.
The Antichrist. Like, he's not holding back at all. And then dedicating it to the very few. It's like, if you aren't ready to challenge everything you thought you knew, don't even bother.
Okay, I'm hooked already. But I have to admit, the title alone, it makes me a little nervous. I mean, Antichrist, it's a pretty loaded term, isn't it?
Absolutely. And Nietzsche knew exactly what he was doing. He wanted to shake people up, shake them out of their comfort zones, force them to confront those uncomfortable truths he believed Christianity had been hiding for centuries.
So it's like a deliberate provocation, a way of grabbing our attention and making us question those assumptions.
Exactly. He's saying, let's strip away all that dogma, the moralizing, and look at the raw, like primal forces that actually drive us, that drive human behavior. And that's where Dionysus comes in.
Right, the Dionysus versus the crucified concept. Okay, so I know Dionysus is the Greek god of wine and revelry and all that, but what does he have to do with Christianity? I don't get it.
Well, think of it this way. It's about contrasting two totally different, fundamentally different ways of just being in the world. So on the one hand, you've got Dionysus, who represents embracing instinct, passion, that raw energy of life itself. He's all about saying yes to experience, even to the parts that are painful. But Christ, on the other hand, at least as Nietzsche saw him, represents like a denial of those instincts. It's like a turning away from the world in favor of this otherworldly ideal.
So it's about embracing life in all its fullness versus kind of seeking solace and like a spiritual escapism.
Yeah, exactly. And Nietzsche thinks that this contrast gets to the core of what he sees as the problem with Christianity. This suppression of our natural instincts, our will to power, our drive to create and overcome.
I see. Okay. I am starting to see how this connects to his whole idea of the Übermensch now. The individual who transcends conventional morality and creates their own values. But there's one part I'm still struggling with: his attack on pity. I mean, isn't compassion a good thing? Shouldn't we feel pity for those who are suffering?
Yeah, this is where Nietzsche is, I think, most often misunderstood. He's not advocating for cruelty or anything. What he's critiquing is a certain kind of pity that he sees as rooted in weakness. A desire to kind of level everyone down to the lowest common denominator. He calls it slave morality, this resentment of strength and excellence, the urge to kind of pull everyone down to a state of mediocrity.
So he's not saying we shouldn't help others, but that our help shouldn't come from this place of weakness or this desire to make everyone the same.
Precisely. He believes that true strength lies in overcoming challenges, in striving for something greater, and that a certain amount of struggle is actually necessary for growth. He even goes as far as to say we should be wary of helping others too much because it can, kind of rob them of the opportunity to develop their own strength and resilience.
Oh, that's a pretty radical idea. But it makes me think of that saying, give a man a fish and you feed him for a day. Teach a man to fish and you feed him for a lifetime. Is that the kind of thing that Nietzsche's getting at?
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And it leads us to one of Nietzsche's most challenging concepts.
Yeah.
the pathos of distance.
Mhm.
He thought that there needs to be this gap, this distinction between those who are striving for greatness, the Übermensch, and those who are just content with mediocrity.
So he's saying that in order for some individuals to really, reach their full potential, there needs to be this separation, this recognition that not everyone's on the same path. But wouldn't that create a really unequal society?
Yeah, and that's something Nietzsche grapples with throughout his work. He recognizes that his vision of the Übermensch could, be seen as elitist, but he argues that true equality is not about everyone being the same. It's about everyone having the opportunity to become the best version of themselves. He believes that a society that embraces this pathos of distance would actually be more dynamic, more creative, and ultimately more fulfilling for everybody, even those who, don't achieve that status of Übermensch.
Okay, I'm trying to wrap my head around that. It's definitely it's a different way of looking at things, that's for sure. And speaking of different perspectives, Nietzsche also compares Christianity to Buddhism. He calls them both nihilistic, but he gives Buddhism points for being more realistic. I don't know, that one threw me for a loop.
I know, right? It does seem counterintuitive. But if you think about it in terms of Nietzsche's whole philosophy, it does start to make sense. Because he sees both Christianity and Buddhism as turning away from life, in a sense. But he thinks Buddhism is, at least, more honest about the nature of reality.
Yes,
Well, they both acknowledge suffering, both religions. But Buddhism doesn't try to offer easy solutions or otherworldly promises. It just recognizes that suffering is a fundamental truth of existence. And it encourages us to confront it head on. And this, I think, aligns with Nietzsche's own emphasis on facing those harsh realities of life rather than just seeking comfort in illusions.
So it's not that he's endorsing Buddhism per se, but he just sees it as being more aligned with his own worldview and its acceptance of suffering as this inherent part of the human experience.
Exactly. And this brings up a really interesting quote. Does that make Buddhism, a better philosophy than Christianity, according to Nietzsche? Or is he ultimately critiquing both religions? He leaves that for us to ponder. I don't know.
All right, so far we've talked about his provocative title, his critique of Christianity, his whole concept of the Übermensch. But how does he explain the rise of Christianity in the first place?
Well, in that source that you sent, there's a section that outlines his analysis of the origins of Christianity. It's really fascinating. He traces what he calls the denaturalization of Jewish morality through 5 stages. He shows how the concept of God kind of evolved from a symbol of strength and justice to this demanding, almost tyrannical figure.
And that's where the priests come in. Right. They become the intermediaries between God and the people, and their interpretation of God's will starts to kind of shape the whole moral landscape.
Right. And what's interesting is that Nietzsche, even though he's so critical of Christianity, he actually acknowledges the boldness of this shift in values. He recognizes the audacity of taking traditional morality and just turning it completely on its head, creating this whole new system based on guilt, sin, and, this need for redemption.
It's like they pulled off this ultimate moral heist. But how did they manage to convince people to buy into this?
This is where the concept of sin comes in. And it is like a brilliant tool for social control, right? It creates this sense of guilt and dependence on the priests for forgiveness and redemption. Nietzsche argues that they, the priests, deliberately cultivated this sense of guilt in order to gain power and influence over people, over the masses.
So even though Christianity emerged as a rebellion against the Jewish priesthood, it ultimately ended up kind of replicating those same power dynamics, just with a different set of symbols and rituals.
Precisely. And this leads us to one of the most surprising, I think, and thought-provoking aspects of the Antichrist. His view of Jesus.
Wait, what? I thought Nietzsche hated Christianity.
He's definitely critical of, organized religion and what he sees as its negative impact on Western civilization. But when it comes to Jesus himself, his tone is actually quite different. In fact, he expresses this kind of admiration, even respect for Jesus.
Hold on, I'm getting whiplash here. How can he admire Jesus if he's so against Christianity? This is where I need some help understanding what Nietzsche's really saying.
It's definitely one of the most nuanced and often misinterpreted aspects of his work, but it gets to the heart of what he means by a reevaluation of values. Remember, Nietzsche is all about challenging those conventional interpretations. And in the case of Jesus, he's arguing that the actual historical figure has been completely distorted by his followers.
Okay, I'm intrigued. So what is Nietzsche's take on the real Jesus? Okay, so you're saying that Nietzsche sees Jesus as this guy who is like misunderstood, even betrayed by his own followers. But what was it about Jesus that Nietzsche actually admired?
Well, Nietzsche saw Jesus as kind of an idiot, and I know that sounds bad, but he's not using the word like the way we use it today. It's not about intelligence. He's referring to this kind of purity, naivete, almost childlike innocence.
So idiot, like someone who's totally uncorrupted by the world, someone who's living in the moment, just guided by like their own inner light.
Exactly. He thought that Jesus lived his truth authentically, without any of the dogma or power seeking that came to characterize his followers. He saw him as this kind of free spirit, someone who really embodied that Dionysian spirit in his, rejection of conventional morality and this embrace of a radical kind of love that transcended like good and evil.
That's really interesting. But if Nietzsche admired Jesus, who does he see as like the bad guy in the story?
For Nietzsche, the real villain of the whole thing is Paul the Apostle. He's the one who Nietzsche believes took Jesus' simple message of love and turned it into this like rigid, guilt-inducing system of sin and redemption.
So according to Nietzsche, Paul is the one who's really responsible for that denaturalization of morality that we were talking about earlier. He's the one who took this like beautiful, life-affirming message and turned it into something so dark and oppressive.
Exactly. Nietzsche sees Paul as this master manipulator, this priest who just craved power and used the theater of Jesus to get it. He argues that Paul kind of reintroduced the very things that Jesus had rejected. Guilt, shame, the need for external authority, all of it.
Wow, that is a pretty harsh assessment of Paul. But it does make you think about how easily a message can be distorted and manipulated, especially when it comes to, religion. It's almost like a game of telephone where the original message gets all jumbled up and changed with every whisper.
Yeah, that's a great analogy. And it's something that Nietzsche was so aware of. He believed that all ideologies, all systems of belief are susceptible to this kind of corruption. Yeah, that's why he was always stressing the importance of critical thinking, constantly questioning what we're told, looking for those hidden motivations behind the messages we receive.
So for Nietzsche, it's not just about rejecting Christianity or any other specific ideology. It's about developing this capacity to think for ourselves, to create our own values, to become our own, moral authority.
Precisely. And that's where his whole concept of the revaluation of values comes in. He's calling for this radical reassessment of everything we've been taught to believe. It's about stripping away those layers of cultural conditioning that have just shaped our entire understanding of, good and evil, right and wrong, everything.
That sounds so liberating, but also a little daunting. I mean, where do we even begin? How do we go about revaluing all values? It's like trying to rebuild a house while you're still living in it.
It is definitely a challenging thing. But Nietzsche really believed it was essential for, both individual and societal growth. He didn't give us a step-by-step guide, but he did give some clues about what a revaluation of values might look like.
Okay, what kind of clues?
Well, he points to figures like Caesar Borgia, that Renaissance prince known for his ruthlessness and ambition.
Wait, Caesar Borgia, the guy who poisoned his enemies and slept with his sister? I don't know if I see him as a role model for moral revaluation?
Well, of course, Nietzsche wasn't condoning Borgia's cruelty or, immorality, but he was fascinated by his boldness, his willingness to just defy convention and kind of carve out his own path in the world. He saw in Borgia this primal energy, this will to power that wasn't held back by the constraints of traditional morality.
So he's admiring his strength and ambition, even if he doesn't agree with all of his methods. It's like saying, here's this guy who's living life on his own terms. He's not afraid to break the rules.
Yeah, exactly. Nietzsche believed that true greatness, often comes at the cost of transgressing social norms, of challenging that status quo. He saw figures like Borgia as kind of embodying what he called master morality, this morality of self-creation and self-overcoming that was just so different from that slave morality he saw in Christianity.
Okay, yeah, that makes sense. But I'm still trying to see how all of this translates into a practical philosophy for, everyday life. I mean, most of us aren't Renaissance princes or Greek gods. How do we apply these ideas, in the real world without poisoning our enemies or running off to join a bacchanal?
Right. That is the million-dollar question, isn't it? And it's something that Nietzsche himself really struggled with. He didn't offer these easy answers, but he did suggest that the first step toward this revaluation of values is to cultivate a spirit of self-awareness, a willingness to question everything that we've been taught, and to really just look at the world with fresh eyes.
So it's about developing this critical lens, learning to kind of see through the illusions and biases that shape our perceptions.
Exactly. And it's also about cultivating this sense of inner strength, a willingness to stand alone, to embrace our individuality, even when it's uncomfortable or, unpopular. Remember the pathos of distance. It's about recognizing that the path to greatness often requires this kind of separation from the herd, a willingness to forge your own path, even if it means standing alone.
That sounds, I don't know, both exciting and terrifying, but I can see how it ties into his whole philosophy of self-overcoming, of striving to become the best version of ourselves, even if it means challenging everything we thought we knew.
And that's what makes Nietzsche so relevant today. Even though he wrote over a century ago, he's asking us to confront these same fundamental questions about meaning, about morality, about, the human condition that we're all still struggling with today.
It's like he's holding up this mirror to our own, anxieties and aspirations and forcing us to look at ourselves honestly and ask, what do I really believe? What kind of life do I actually want to create?
Exactly.
Yeah.
And the beauty of Nietzsche is that he doesn't give us the answers. He just gives us those tools, the framework, the encouragement to ask those questions ourselves and to find our own answers.
Okay, I think I'm getting a better sense of what Nietzsche's all about now. But I'm also realizing that this is a conversation that could go on for hours, maybe even days.
It's true. There's so much depth and complexity to his thought, but I think we've laid some good groundwork here, for further exploration.
Yeah, you're right. And I'm curious to hear what you think about, I guess, one last piece of the puzzle here. The role of art in his philosophy. The source material mentions that he was a big fan of Wagner, and he often uses really poetic language in his own writing. It seems like aesthetics really played a big role in his thinking.
Oh, absolutely. For Nietzsche, art wasn't just entertainment or, a way to escape from reality. He saw it as this vital force for life affirmation, a way to connect with our, deepest emotions and aspirations, to embrace that beauty and intensity of existence, even when things are, even in the face of suffering and tragedy.
So art as a way of saying yes to life, even when it's, painful or difficult. Is that kind of what he's getting at?
Exactly. He thought that great art could awaken our senses, challenge our perspectives, and inspire us to, to reach for something higher. He even saw tragedy as a form of affirmation, as a way of confronting the pain and suffering of existence, without flinching.
That's a really, really powerful idea. It makes me think about how some of the most beautiful and moving works of art, come from great suffering or hardship. It's like the artist is taking that pain and transforming it into something beautiful and meaningful.
That's a beautiful way to put it. And it speaks to Nietzsche's belief that true strength comes not from denying suffering or avoiding it, but from embracing it, from using it as fuel for creativity and growth.
Yeah.
He famously said, "What doesn't kill me makes me stronger." And I think he saw art as one of the most powerful ways to, to turn our wounds into wisdom, to turn our pain into beauty.
That's a really inspiring thought. It makes me want to go listen to some Wagner right now.
I think Nietzsche would approve.
So we've covered a lot of ground today. We've talked about his critique of Christianity, his whole concept of the Übermensch, his call for a revaluation of values, and even the role of art in his philosophy. But I feel like we've only, just scratched the surface of this really complex and challenging thinker.
You're absolutely right. Nietzsche's work is it's like this huge ocean with all these hidden depths and unexpected currents.
Well, I, for one, am ready to dive in deeper. But I think we should take a little break first to let all of this soak in a bit. All right, so I think we left off talking about the role of art in Nietzsche's philosophy. But, the question that's probably on everyone's mind is how do we actually live all of this? I mean, how do we take all these big, heady philosophical ideas and actually apply them to, our everyday lives?
Yeah, I think that's the challenge and the beauty of Nietzsche, isn't it? I mean, he doesn't give us this set of rules or a step-by-step guide to follow. He just gives us a whole new way of seeing things, a whole new way of thinking. It's like he's saying, go out there, create your own values, forge your own path, become the philosophers you were meant to be.
So instead of giving us all the answers, he's just giving us the tools to find our own answers.
Yes.
He's that really cool teacher who encourages you to, think for yourself instead of just spitting back facts.
Exactly.
Yeah.
He wants us to develop what he called the philosophical hammer. It's about having that intellectual courage to, smash those old tired ideas and test them and their validity and see things from, lots of different perspectives.
I love that image, the philosophical hammer. It's like we're breaking down all those mental walls that limit our thinking, and we can build something new and stronger in its place. But how do we even know, which walls to break down? Where do we even start?
Well, I think it starts with cultivating a sense of, I don't know, curiosity, open-mindedness. Don't be afraid to question your own beliefs, even the ones that feel the most sacred to you. Nietzsche would say, hold them up to the light, examine them, really look at them from every angle, and see if they still hold true for you.
So it's about being willing to let go of the things that we've always taken for granted, to really challenge those assumptions that we have about the world and about ourselves.
Absolutely. And it's also about exposing ourselves to new ideas, new experiences, new ways of just seeing the world. Talk to people who think differently than you do. Travel to places that challenge your preconceptions. Read books that make you question everything you thought you knew.
That sounds kind of exciting and also maybe a little bit scary, honestly. It's like stepping out of your comfort zone into the unknown. But I guess that's where the real growth happens, right?
Exactly. He believed that true strength comes from embracing that discomfort, from pushing ourselves beyond our perceived limits. And remember that pathos of distance thing we were talking about before. It's about having the courage to stand apart from the crowd, to embrace our individuality, even when it feels, isolating or uncomfortable.
Okay, but what about compassion? I mean, earlier we were talking about his critique of pity, and it made me wonder if his philosophy is ultimately, a little harsh and individualistic, maybe. Is there room for empathy and connection in this whole revaluation of values thing?
That's a good question. It gets to a common misconception about Nietzsche. He wasn't advocating for this cold, heartless kind of individualism. What he rejected was that kind of pity that weakens both the giver and the receiver, that's rooted in, fear and this desire to just level everyone down.
So it's not about being indifferent to suffering, but about approaching it from a place of strength and empowerment.
Exactly. True compassion for Nietzsche comes from this place of understanding and respect for the other person's struggle, from a desire to really help them overcome those challenges.
Yeah.
Not to just kind of alleviate their pain.
So it's about empowering others to find their own strength.
Yeah.
Not about rescuing them from their struggles.
Yeah, that's a great way to put it. And it ties into this whole idea of the Übermensch.
Yeah.
That individual who strives for greatness, who pushes themselves and others to reach their full potential.
Okay, I see. I'm starting to see how all of this kind of fits together now. It is a very different way of looking at things, I have to say. But there's this certain logic to it, this kind of radical honesty almost.
Yeah, and that's what's so compelling about Nietzsche. I mean, he makes us confront those big questions, those uncomfortable truths about ourselves and the world. He doesn't always give us these easy answers, but he gives us those tools to find our own way.
So what does all this mean for us? The everyday folks just trying to navigate our own lives and make sense of the world. I mean, how do we put all these Nietzschean principles into practice without, becoming hermits or tyrants or something?
Well, I think it starts with just cultivating this critical awareness of the messages that are, coming at us all the time. We live in this world that's just saturated with information.
Right.
And so much of it is designed to manipulate us, to sell us stuff or, make us conform. And Nietzsche would just say, develop your own filters. Yeah. Learn to separate the truth from the falsehood. What serves you from what's, trying to control you.
So it's about becoming more discerning consumers of information, but also more conscious creators of our own reality, right?
That's a great way to put it. And it's about cultivating this sense of self-reliance. Don't be afraid to stand up for what you believe in, even if it goes against the grain. Don't be afraid to be different, to be exceptional. Remember, for Nietzsche, that whole herd mentality is the enemy of individual greatness.
I love that. It's like he's giving us permission to be ourselves, to really embrace our uniqueness, even if it makes some people uncomfortable. But how do we balance that with, the need for connection, the need for community? Can we be both independent and interconnected at the same time?
Oh, absolutely. In fact, Nietzsche believed that true individuality can only really flourish in a society that values and encourages that individuality. But he also recognized that the process of, self-discovery often requires those periods of solitude, that deep introspection, wrestling with our own demons. It's about finding that balance between cultivating that inner strength and then, reaching out to connect with others who share those same values and aspirations that you have.
Okay, I think we're getting a better sense of the complexity and nuance of Nietzsche's thought now. It's not just about, rejecting morality or embracing chaos or whatever. It's about this much deeper and more radical transformation of consciousness, like
Right.
a shift in perspective that lets us see the world and see ourselves with completely new eyes.
Exactly. And that's what makes him so relevant, even today. His ideas challenge us to really confront the deepest questions, about what it means to be human, to live authentically, and to create a world that's worthy of our highest aspirations.
Well, it's safe to say our deep dive into the Antichrist has left us with more questions than answers. But that's okay, right? Because, as Nietzsche himself said, the most valuable insights are those that make us question everything we thought we knew.
Yeah. And I think that the most important question of all is the one that Nietzsche poses at the very end of the Antichrist. And that's revaluation of all values. What does that actually mean for you? What values do you want to embody, in your own life? What kind of world do you want to create? These are all questions, worth thinking about long after our little deep dive has ended.
Absolutely. So to all our listeners out there, we encourage you to, keep going on this journey of exploration. Read Nietzsche, discuss his ideas with your friends, and most importantly, put them into practice, in your own unique way. The journey to becoming the Ubermensch is a lifelong one, but it all starts with a single step. Thanks for joining us on this deep dive, and until next time, keep questioning, keep growing, and keep striving for greatness.